Hello and welcome to our talk, How Trimming Phonetic Alignments Improves the Inference of Sound Correspondence Patterns from Multilingual Word Lists. We want to show how we can improve the regularity of automatically inferred correspondence patterns among cognate sets from related languages. We do so by eliminating noisy data, such as morphemes and non-cognate elements that are still part of the data sets. By doing so, we shorten the long-tail distribution of correspondence patterns with very few occurrences across the data set. Correspondence patterns in linguistics are formed by a set of sound correspondences between multiple languages. That is, in our example figure among 4 fictitious languages, we can see how 2 example correspondence patterns occur in multiple words. This means that they are all reflexes of a sound in the ancestral language of those languages A, B, C, and D. Those recurring correspondence patterns form the basis for the reconstruction of proto-languages and also for proving the genetic relationship between languages. One example of trimming in historical linguistics is provided in the next figure. We see how in Quechua, the root manu is combined with different morphemes in some varieties. In one case, it's ku, in another case, it's na, but in both cases, it's not related to the original root, and thus they should be thrown out of the reconstruction. 3 other varieties do not have any segment there, thus we consider that there are gaps in the alignment. Trimming in historical linguistics is often practiced in reality, but it's usually not made explicit. True of the very few examples that are explicit about this are given here on the slide from Payne 91 and Kayon and Chacon last year. We transfer the trimming of alignment sites from computational biology, where the trimming of DNA sequence alignments is commonly done in order to reduce the noise in the data for improved phylogenetic analysis. Among the methods are tools that remove alignment sites based on the amount of gaps that are in there or based on entropy values of the alignment site. We use 10 different data sets in our study to have a broad typological sample. All the data sets are openly available and have a comparable amount of languages and concepts in them, so they're all of comparable size. And crucially, they all have their cognacy annotated from the creator of the data sets themselves. So this is not something that we infer automatically, whether this is already provided with the original publication of the data. What we do, however, is to align all those cognate sets using the LingPy algorithm. So the alignments are inferred automatically. We implement 2 different trimming strategies, one which we call the core-oriented setting and another gap-oriented setting. We've set a heuristic threshold of 50% for gaps. This means that we identify all alignment sites, that is columns in this case, where there are at least 50% gaps. Those are all candidates for trimming. However, there are 2 exceptions for this. First, in all cases, we do preserve a minimal CVVC skeleton, that is a minimum structure of 1 consonant and 1 vowel that has to be preserved in our cognate sets. We do this in order to reduce chance resemblances and to exclude very short alignments that could be just a coincidence. Further, the gap-oriented and the core-oriented trimming are distinguished by either removing all sites that have more than 50% gaps, which is the case in the gap-oriented trimming, or by preserving a core as done in the first model. But now, how do we measure all this? We've mentioned the regularity before. So in a first step, we count the number of occurrences for each correspondence pattern in the data set. And we consider all patterns with at least 3 occurrences to be regular. This means that all correspondence patterns that only occur once or twice are not considered regular. In the next step, we go through all the cognate sets in the data and check for each cognate set how many of the patterns are above this threshold. And we decided that 75% is a good default value just for starting to work on the methods, so that at least 75% of the patterns in a cognate set have to occur at least 3 times in the data in order to consider a word to be regular as well. Using these two methods, these two measures, we compare the regularity results either without trimming or in the gap and the core-oriented trimming. For all data sets, the best results with respect to regularity are achieved in the gap-oriented trimming. This is both the case for the proportion of regular correspondence patterns and for the proportion of regular words. And this holds without exception to all data sets. There are smaller differences with respect to the amount of improvement that is achieved by the gap-oriented trimming, but nonetheless, the results are quite clear. Interestingly, the data sets with low internal diversity are the ones that show the fewest improvements. This is, for example, the case in cross-Indian, where the original amount of regularity, the original proportion of regular correspondence patterns is 73%, and only showing an improvement of 2%. And meanwhile, other data sets, like as Constantine-Chipchin, show an improvement of 5% in the same category. So, despite the fact that there are small differences, the improvements are clear. As a further proof of concept, we compare the target trimming strategies to a random model of deleting alignment sites. So, for each trimming strategy, we count how many alignment sites are removed in the step and randomly delete the same amount of alignment sites in all settings and see whether this random model actually achieves a higher regularity than our targeted trimming. And indeed, at least for the core-oriented setting, this is the case for many data sets. So this means that by randomly deleting sites that are sometimes also within the preserved core, we actually achieve a higher regularity. This is further confirmed by the fact that this is not the case in the gap-oriented trimming, where we actually do have the best results in nearly all cases achieved by the targeted trimming and not by the random approach. Further, we can see that we successfully remove the amount of irregular patterns. So by comparing the gap-oriented trimming to the correspondence patterns without trimming, we see for each data set that the amount of correspondence patterns is reduced. So we have individual correspondence patterns on the x-axis and their value on the y-axis reflecting the amount of alignment sites that they include. So we can observe two facts from this plot. First, the overall number of correspondence patterns is reduced in the gap-oriented trimming, which is kind of obvious because we trim alignment sites and remove them from the data. But we also see that we successfully remove those alignment sites that include only very few, we remove those correspondence patterns that include only very few alignment sites, those the irregular correspondence patterns that we take as further proof of concept of removing problematic material and data. In the qualitative analysis, we see that in some cases, the trimming works just as intended, comparing our trimming procedure to a reconstruction provided by another scholar. We see that in one case of Chipchin, we identify successfully all those alignment sites that are not reconstructed, and only those sites are preserved that should be preserved and actually get reconstructed. So this was a nice confirmation of our method. However, there are also problematic cases, such as this slide, where we see that the third column with two glottal stops in Veruca and Bribri actually does get trimmed because there are more gaps than are defined in our threshold, but the glottal stop is actually reconstructed in the protoform. So this is a case where our trimming fails and where we need to improve our method. So as a conclusion, we see that trimming does improve the regularity of inferred correspondence patterns, and we do eliminate a lot of the noisy data. And we also see that we successfully shorten the distribution tail of patterns with very few alignment sites, which all in all seems like a promising transfer of trimming to historical linguistics. In the future, we want to find better thresholds, both for gaps and regularity, possibly also find other minimal skeletons and templates that should be preserved, and also to see how these improved correspondence patterns can be used for other tasks in historical linguistics, such as reconstruction. Thank you.